Welcome. Welcome to In the Fight Civil Engagement 101. My name is Hetty Weinberg. I'm the Executive Director of the American Civil Liberties of Tennessee, and I'm joined tonight by our awesome policy team, Brandon Tucker, ACLU of Tennessee Policy Director, and Jack Siegenthaler, ACLU of Tennessee Voting Rights Strategist. We are really delighted that you're joining us tonight and thankful, frankly, very thankful that after 4.5 years, we can finally exhale and we can begin the hard work of healing and continue our bold pursuit of justice and equity, not least of all, dismantling white supremacy. We'd love for you to drop a few words in the chat if you'd like to about what you're most looking forward to in 2021. And I'm going to start by just saying I'm really looking forward to working with all of you as we protect and advance, especially in this state, justice and equity in Tennessee. For our agenda, which you will see on the screen, we're going to begin with a brief description of how ACLU does its work, and then focus on the 112th Tennessee General Assembly, describing who serves in it and how an idea becomes a law. And we'll talk a little bit about the work that we're involved in at the legislature, and most importantly, how you can play a role in legislative advocacy, and also describe some of the legislation we're supporting and opposing. We'll leave about 10-15 minutes for questions. So please make sure to, as we're moving through the agenda, just drop your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat, but in the Q&A. And then we will make sure to share them among us and respond to them if we can. So let's begin. I think most of you know ACLU, and you know that our mission is to translate the promises, the guarantees of the Bill of Rights into promises for all Tennesseans. And what makes our work, I think, so unique is that we deploy what we call an integrative advocacy model. And what that means is that we use a mix of strategies, a portfolio of strategies when we pursue a proactive initiative or when we challenge an attack on our civil liberties and civil rights. And in Tennessee, those attacks are going to be relentless because we know who serves in our Tennessee legislature. The integrative advocacy model really expands ACLU's ability to strategically and effectively pursue transformative justice, which I think is what we are all about. And the strategies we use include advocacy, awareness, coalition building, legislative lobbying, policy research, and probably what we're best known for is our litigation. Sometimes we use these strategies simultaneously, sometimes consecutively. But what's important to know is that when we approach a problem, when we approach a campaign, we think about which strategies are best to use. Often we know that it's important to raise awareness among the public before we're going to pursue a legislative initiative, so that the public starts to understands the issue and contacts their legislators to build support. And that's one thing you'll hear more about. Our comms team, when we file litigation, is deliberately engaged in how to best explain via social media and other venues, how to best explain what the issue is and why actually ACLU filed a lawsuit. And when we lobby against some of the most egregious and most restrictive laws that we see pass sometimes, for instance, the abortion ban bill that passed in 2019, when we were unable to defeat it there, we joined with our partners and filed a lawsuit. So just enjoy knowing that there are a blend of strategies that ACLU uses when we confront an issue that we want to focus on. Tonight, our focus is on our legislative lobbying strategy. And what I'd like to do now is turn over the mic to Brandon Tucker, our policy director.
Thank you, Hetty. If we can go to the next slide to discuss the 112th Tennessee General Assembly. And I just want to start with why we're doing this. And to be clear, there's entirely too much influence, intelligence, individuals and organizations joining us tonight with organizing skills and too many community leaders to be locked out of the process of governing. And so what we know and what I know is that the legislature our state's government can seem like an intimidating place, unreserved for actual residents of the state of Tennessee, and left to our state lawmakers and their own ideas and their own point of view. But nothing could be further from the truth. And in the past number of years, we've seen just egregious bills passed without much coverage, much public input, many individuals at the Capitol, and individuals feeling unequipped or ill-equipped with the information to be involved with the legislative process. And so we're starting with the basics tonight. And if you know all the basics, bear with us. There's opportunities to learn more about our agenda, how you can be involved, and what we are tracking, monitoring, and lobbying and advocating for this year. But what we want to start with and be clear with is that the state legislature is a place for all of us. And we're going to learn the process to figure out how we can inject our voices and our points of view. So if you can go to the next slide. The 112th General Assembly will last us 2 years. We are recently, last year was our 111th. And the importance of this is legislation and bills that are introduced in the first year of a General Assembly, they can roll over to the second year if they're not fully pursued, if they're not passed, or if the bill is not, as we call it inside the building, killed. And so so that's the importance of a new General Assembly. And what we know is that in our state Senate, it's being led by Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally of East Tennessee. And in our House, State House is led by Speaker Cameron Sexton of Crossville, Tennessee. And we see that our House is comprised of 99 members and our Senate is comprised of 33 members. But what's important from these dots that are represented? Here in the state of Tennessee, we represent one of 34 Republican supermajorities. And so that means a couple of things. One, there's no need for a single vote from the opposing party to pass legislation. And two, a veto by the governor means very little because they have a veto-proof majority in both chambers. And if you can go to the next slide, I want to speak a little bit about the path to passage and how a bill gets introduced. And so, as I just spoke about our leaders and seniority and party, any legislator can introduce a bill. And these bills are informed and conceptualized in a few different ways. And if we can go to the next slide, legislators often get these ideas on pieces of legislation to promote from advocacy groups like the ACLU of Tennessee or the NAACP or ALEC or the NRA or religious groups. I can tell you that we've proposed legislation to members of both parties. And also, legislators receive ideas from their constituents. And there are sometimes unique and localized problems that can be resolved by state legislation. And legislation is also informed by national trends. And that's a very important point because Tennessee doesn't operate in a vacuum or in a silo. We're very much aware of what's happening nationally. We're very much aware of what's happening culturally, and that could be a good thing or a bad thing. For example, in nationwide and here in Tennessee, I think there will be a keen focus on police reform. Some of us have known how certain communities have interacted with law enforcement for decades. Some of us have been introduced to injustices more recently, but it's become a pressing issue to where not only in the Tennessee legislature, but state legislatures across the country will be introducing and passing legislation to reform how our communities are policed, and more specifically, our communities of color are policed. But there's also a flip side to national trends. And, what we saw, let's use an example of 2008, when there were clearly too many people of color for certain individuals casting ballots. There were laws to restrict access to the ballot box almost immediately. And then bills are also introduced by legislators' personal interest, what their background is, what their profession is, typically where they reserve their expertise to pass and introduce legislation. If we can go to the next slide. And the path to passage is a long one. These bills are informed and conceptualized in a few and debated in a few different ways. This allows groups like ours, ACLU of Tennessee, and also community members and residents of the state, some time and opportunity to weigh in. So once a bill is filed, that's when we see it. That's when we read it. That's when we research it and establish our position about a piece of legislation. And then I mentioned leadership earlier. They referred to a specific committee. And that's a very key point of our advocacy. And so by the time a bill is introduced and filed and sent to committee, we have already done a ton of research, contacted a number of legislators, and are now beginning our integrated advocacy model. So I think my audio is messing up. So if Jack or Hetty can step in for just a moment to talk about the path to passage, just so we can get the program rolling.
Hi there. Yeah, and I apologize. We all apologize for technology. And as you might imagine, 11 months into this, what we're all dealing with, it's still hard to sometimes get the technology to do what we want to do. I think Brandon got through a lot of the journey a bill takes, an idea takes before it becomes law, or at some point in the process is defeated and doesn't see the light of day if it dies in a committee. There are parliamentary ways to pull a bill out of committee once it's when it does not move through, and that's just something we won't go into right now. But it is an interesting and important point to realize that some of the best lobbyists and most seasoned legislators know how to keep a bill alive or how to kill it so that it doesn't move forward. Brandon wanted to talk and just share the definition, and maybe we can go there with the next slide. And Brandon, feel free to come back if the technology works. Then, the definition of legislative advocacy, please. Okay, I will go ahead. You can read it, but it's pretty powerful for everyone to know that this is what's centering our work. Legislative advocacy is the effort to create and or change policy through the legislature. This may include lobbying legislators, building coalitions, raising public awareness, engaging community members, and much more. And that's what Brandon and Jack are going to continue to talk about as the evening progresses. As you can see from these identified tactics and strategies, that's what ACLU typically does at the legislature. And some of our most exciting work is when we are engaging community members and building coalitions, because that's when we know we are growing the chorus, and the louder the voices, the more the strength of those voices to hopefully persuade legislators to do the right thing. It is a process. I was asked to speak about how we prioritize our advocacy. And as you might know or not know, and I invite you all to look at the Tennessee General Assembly website, where you can see the hundreds of bills that will be filed within the next week and a half, which is a period of time legislators have to file bills. Thousands of bills in the 2-year session. And those bills are everything from agriculture to alcohol to banking to insurance to then the issues that we become most focused on: criminal justice reform, policing, LGBT equality, reproductive justice, religious freedom, freedom of speech. Those are, as our development director likes to say, we're like a vending machine. You know, there are lots of things to choose from, but what's the most important thing to know is that our focus is strictly on those civil liberties guaranteed under the Bill of Rights, and that's what we're fighting for and wanting to ensure that we advance in our state. And it is a steep, steep uphill battle. So the question is, how do we prioritize? And it's not easy. Um, we have been committed for quite some time, but there's no question, and Brandon spoke to it earlier, we remain committed to focus on communities of color, marginalized communities, limited income communities, recognizing that equal protection under the law ensures and requires that we keep hammering away at the reason for, or the need to advance civil liberties in our state and across the country. So we are now, our focus is on criminal justice reform, which includes reimagining police. It's on education equity and ensuring that all public school students have access to a high quality education and are not moving through what you have probably heard of before, the school to prison pipeline, which is unfortunately alive and well in Tennessee public schools. We are very interested always when we identify bills to work on, to work in partnership. So our criminal justice work, we partner with NAACP, we partner with Free Hearts, we partner with groups like the Beacon Center and Americans for Prosperity who do work in that area. When we focus on another priority area, which is access to the ballot box, increasing access to the ballot box, voting rights, making sure that voting suppression tactics are removed or certainly are not. We're not seeing legislation that's actually providing for more voting rights tactics, voting suppression tactics. We are committed to ensuring that we're expanding and fighting for all people to have the right to vote, basically universal suffrage. So when we look at the bills as they are introduced, even though some we know from the get-go are not going to be issues we're interested in, we literally read every summary. You know, there's always a brief summary paragraph that identifies what the bill is about, and we read through every summary. Then, of course, we have to pare down. We could probably identify 300 bills that focus in our priority areas, and then we start to look at which bills would actually directly impact communities of color, Black and Brown communities. Is there a chance to successfully defeat a bill or to advance a bill forward? And what is the opportunity to work with other partners in our advocacy? And I underscore that because, again, increasing the chorus will help us and help all of us ensure that our state is moving forward. Those are the issues or the priority area, you know, the priority areas now. These are some of the criteria we look at. And then recognizing as we move forward with a legislative agenda, sometimes we're opposing a bill and sometimes we're promoting a bill. And as Brandon said earlier, we are often in these past few years have been introducing legislation. And that's really what's most exciting, because that's when we get to shape with our partners how we can move forward and advance our state. So that's the background for how we effectively decide what bills we're going to pursue. I think the next question is, what does our legislative advocacy look like? What does it look like in the building? And what does it look like out of the building on the streets? So inside the building, inside the legislature, as you have already heard, and we'll go into more detail, Brandon and Jack will go into more detail, we lobby. And what does lobbying mean? It means talking with legislators one-on-one or sometimes in committee about our positions on the bills. What we know and what's very important is that legislators, it's easier to talk to a legislator about and hopefully have them hear our position, even if they don't agree, but ask questions if they know us. So we spend a lot of time getting to know legislators. Some have been there for quite some time. We know that this session, there will be new legislators who are just coming into the chambers. So building relationships, strengthening those relationships, again, on both sides of the aisle. We talk with legislators on both sides of the aisle. We ask legislators on both sides of the aisle to sponsor our bills. And even when we don't agree with them on one issue, we still work with them on other issues. So we like to say that we're friends to all, but we're sometimes going to have to agree to disagree. I'll be honest to say there are some legislators that we don't enter their office because we know there's not going to be a willingness to hear our side, and there's actually might be some hostility. But we have strong relationships with folks on both sides of the aisle. We build coalition with our advocacy partners. Now, ACLU is very visible at the legislature, as are our partners. We work very closely with American Muslim Advisory Council, with Turk Tennessee Immigrant and Refugee Rights Coalition, with Planned Parenthood, with NAACP, with Equity Alliance, and our partners. And will be the difficult part because we will not be in the building because of the pandemic, but our partners and ACLU, we sit together and we brainstorm and we find out what different people, what lobbyists have heard, and we sometimes sort of divide up who we need to talk with. But the bottom line is coalition work is essential to being able to ensure that for our purposes, which is to advance freedom and fairness in this state, we are working with partners and allies, sometimes unlikely ones. We, as you probably know, legislators most don't have research analysts, and we spend a great deal of time providing that research and expertise to legislators. Often, sometimes, asking our national ACLU colleagues to share information, or sometimes even get on a call with legislators so that we can share information about what's happening in other states, or sometimes just being able to provide the data they need to help them make a decision. And as you might not be surprised about, funding issues and the budget, and being able to talk about the legislature, a piece of legislation, and how it could impact the state were a lawsuit to be filed if there's bad legislation that passes, or if there is a good consequence with legislation passing that will advance civil liberties, and in fact, actually open the doors to more businesses, which is something legislators are very interested in because of the need to bring more tax dollars into the state. We do spend time testifying when we're not just talking one-on-one with legislators. We do testify, and I think there's a slide that you will see that actually there I am talking about how this was about last year, 2019, when the abortion ban bill was introduced, and it was the governor's bill, and the bill we knew from the get-go was unconstitutional. Tennessee Right to Life actually was on the same side we were in urging the legislature not to pass it. Members of the Senate Judiciary Committee, Senate Bill 1236 as amended is wrong, not just because it is unconstitutional and unfair to taxpayers, and especially to Tennessee women and their families, but because it puts politics above a woman's health. The ACLU stands with Planned Parenthood. We stand with the Center for Reproductive Rights, whose letter I shared with the committee, with Healthy and Free, and with many other organizations and hundreds of thousands of Tennesseans across the state in opposition to this legislation. We do look forward to working with legislators on policies that can have a more positive impact on the life of Tennesseans, like ensuring comprehensive prenatal care for pregnant women and reducing this state's shockingly high rate of maternal and infant mortality. In the meantime, ACLU Tennessee urges you to oppose Senate Bill 1236, or as I can guarantee you, we will see you in court. Thank you. So that's an example of one way we clearly talk with legislators, testify in front of them, and when necessary, if we think that they might pass a bill, tell them that we will see them in court. Okay, the next question is, so you know what we do inside the building, and then the question is, what do we do outside the building? And that's where our incredible comms team plays such an important role, because as we talked about, often when legislation is introduced, good or bad legislation, you need to set the context, place the legislation in the context of what is happening. So our comms team is always thinking about how to best message the legislation, message but talk about the issue. And we do that through our social media. We run op-eds, we appear, on the radio and in TV. Most importantly, we want to be able to talk with folks who are either supporting or opposing the legislation that we are engaged in. And so there's Claire Gardner, our community engagement strategist, which she has done the last couple of years, often speaking at rallies where we're saying very clearly anti-abortion legislation that shuts down reproductive health care access for men and women in Tennessee has to stop. And so we are often on the streets again with our partners talking about what would be best for all of Tennessee. Regardless, it's not individuals we're talking about. We're talking about the state as a whole, the government not interfere in individuals' private decision making. One of the bullet points up here about how to apply pressure from the outside is ensuring that we find the strongest messengers to influence, and I like the word better, persuade legislators. And so often, clergy in Tennessee, it's very important that clergy members are engaged in talking with their legislators. Business communities play such an important role when it comes to LGBTQ equality legislation, both fighting the really egregious legislation or promoting the positive legislation to advance LGBTQ equality. The healthcare community has such a strong voice when it comes to healthcare and ensuring access of abortion for all women in Tennessee. So again, sometimes ACLU stays in the background, but we find and work with those voices that are I don't want to say much more important, but that can in fact persuade legislators perhaps more than we can. But what you will hear later from Jack and Brandon, the importance of your voices. So that's what I'd like to do right now, is turn the mic over to Jack to talk about how we can all work together.
Thanks, Hetty. Yeah, so I'm going to talk about how everyone can get involved in legislative advocacy efforts at both the state level and the local level. So if we go to the next slide, please. First, get in touch with your legislators on issues you care about. Constituent contact still works, still matters. These folks answer to constituents, most of them every couple years. So contact can mean calling, emailing, writing a letter, or setting a meeting with your legislator. We'd encourage you to monitor new legislation, whether it's in the press or on social media, but we'll also have on our website a page for legislation that we are working on. And when there's an issue that moves you, we'd encourage you to reach out to your legislator. We'll also be sending out regular emails and calls to action throughout the year for bills we're lobbying for or against. Finally, in the next few months, we're going to be hosting a virtual lobby day. So this is a chance for advocacy groups like ours to connect legislators and constituents on issues we care about and you care about. So if you sign up, we'll set a meeting between you and your legislator or their staffer, all virtually this year. And you'll have a chance to speak to some piece of legislation, whether that's bail reform or trans rights or policing. Again, we'll set the meeting, offer a training, provide supportive materials to prep, just to make sure the legislator hears your voice on these issues. So we hope to see you all there, and we'll be setting the date for that soon. We'll get you more information. Next slide. Next, we'd encourage you to organize and motivate others to take action. So first, we'll have volunteer shifts available in the coming months where we will text or call constituents and encourage them to contact legislators. So some of you on the call may have volunteered on our voting rights campaign last year. We contacted about 150,000 voters across Tennessee. We'll be doing more of that. And in this case, for example, if there's a legislator who's on the fence about a policing bill and they're from Greenville, we might reach out to folks in Greenville and say, hey, here's what's going on, and your legislator should hear your voice. We also have resources on our website, ACLU-TN.org, and our social media on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. So sign up for alerts on our website, follow us on social. You can share our legislative actions, which are letters online folks can fill out advocating for an issue that will be sent on to representatives. And, encourage you to just talk to family and friends about what you're learning about the legislature, about our work, and about how they can get involved too. Next slide. Finally, we encourage you to keep track of your state legislators in the media and on social, but also your local officials, your mayor, your city council member, your board of ed representative. So much governing happens, of course, at the local level. So let us know if you see legislation advancing or restricting civil liberties in your town or your county. A lot of local government meetings are available online now more than in the past in the COVID era. So attend local government meetings. We would love to join you and help as possible and as needed with local advocacy. We've recently worked to advance an ordinance stopping local law enforcement in Shelby County from obtaining military-grade weaponry. We worked on legislation in Nashville related to license plate reader cameras, but it's not just about Nashville or Memphis. We want to know and work on what's happening in Pulaski and Crossville and Union City. There's important work everywhere that we'd love to advance and advocate with you and alongside you all. So please do reach out if we can provide support, particularly at the local level. So there should be a poll that pops up now. You can check the boxes that interest you, and we will follow up and make sure you get more information about those opportunities down the road and anything else that we're working on in this regard. So I will kick it back over to Brandon to talk about our proactive legislative agenda in the upcoming session.
Thank you, Jack. Please give me a notification if my audio does not sound good. All right, so with that being said, I think there are two ways to respond to just how we focus on the multitude of issues that we are required to advocate for or required to defend against. And if we can go to the next slide, I remember when I first joined the ACLU, I kept hearing a term called "we cover the waterfront" as it pertains to issue areas, because it's not just a single issue organization. We aren't just a free speech organization. We aren't just a racial justice organization. Our voice is needed, and we are advocates and lobbyists, and we mobilize on a plethora of issues. And so, if you all can see the issue areas presented here, any one organization can focus on any one of these issues full time and have plenty of work to do. But as you heard Hetty lay out, we have to determine which initiatives we put the weight of our organization behind, we put our resources and our time behind. But as you can see, the mandate of our organization is we are true and consistent on our commitment to a fair criminal justice system, the sanctity of free speech, our steadfastness to reproductive rights and fair treatment of immigrants, are unwavering and resolve to racial equity, and our expertise in privacy and surveillance and technology, and also our decades-long work in the voting rights space. These are issues that once pieces of legislation are filed, we read them, we research them, we identify them if they are particularly helpful or harmful to our organization's mission, and we establish an integrated advocacy plan to promote the bills that fall within these issue areas to passage, or we advocate strongly against them. And so this gives you just a sense of the work we have to do and the work we are asking you all to join us in as you all see bills that are filed that fall within these issue areas. We'll get up to speed on them, we'll lobby against them, we'll try to mobilize and try to see if they are policies that we support, make sure they pass, and if they're policies that we are against, we'll try to defeat them. And when all else fails, try to lean on other resources and tools the ACLU has to ensure that the communities that we seek to support and defend are not harmed. And if we can go to the next slide. The next issue here is our proactive agenda. So I just spoke to what we have to consistently watch out for, bills and legislation that falls within all of those issue areas. But we also have the ability to look at or establish our own proactive agenda. And earlier, as my audio cut out, trying to speak to initiatives that fall within trends that cannot be ignored any longer. And one of those is the need to reform how our law enforcement interacts with communities of color and also poorer communities in our rural areas. And the need for this is, again, it's either what certain individuals have known for a lifetime or what other individuals have experienced and conceded as a need for reform just this past year. So if we can go to the next slide, here are just a few things that will be filed and introduced. We want to end no-knock warrants. Look, the no-knock warrants, their original intent was for hostage situations or situations where an individual would inflict harm on themselves, or an instance of an individual barricading themselves. The original intent was not to be gung-ho or rabid about drug enforcement. That started maybe 30 or 40 years ago with our war on drugs and has gotten out of control even more so ever since. We're wanting to pursue a duty to intervene policy. As you all can take a step back, close your eyes and remember what we witnessed over the summer, and police officer after police officer after police officer standing while an individual named George Floyd was being suffocated by an officer's knee. That is an absence of a duty to intervene policy. That is complicit behavior, and we want to ensure that state law requires whenever law enforcement witnesses illegal or inappropriate behavior, they have a duty to stop it and also report it to a supervisor. A ban on chokeholds and strangleholds. This is an obvious, simple task or initiative that the Tennessee legislature can promote. And also the cancellation of years-old warrants for petty crimes. What we've seen too often here in Tennessee and also in other states is over-policing and pretextual stops being initiated because of the hope that the individual that they're stopping has an outstanding arrest warrant, and that individual can be arrested, taken to jail, having to post bail, having to go to court. And so right now, misdemeanor warrants for misdemeanors are executable up to 5 years. We want to reduce that to 1 year because for someone having an outstanding traffic violation or failure to appear and them being pulled over and arrested in 4 years after that warrant is just unacceptable. And if we can go to the next slide. In addition to our police reform, more general criminal justice reform, and I'll speak quickly because I know we're pressed for time, is reforming our bail system. And we can continue to the next slide. Reforming our bail system. In addition to bail, ensuring that the individuals who are reentering our society in our communities from prison aren't hampered with exorbitant fines and fees, like paying for their supervision, and also ending juvenile life without parole. If you are convicted of a certain offense before the age of 18, if you're convicted before you can be even considered for parole, it's 51 years of your life. So if you commit an offense at 17, you have until 68 years old to where you are parole eligible. And that to us is unacceptable, and we know that that has to be reformed this year. If we can go to the next slide. And then lastly, our proactive voting rights work. We know that the path to a more fair Tennessee, to a more equitable Tennessee, to a Tennessee that prioritizes civil liberties and civil rights is through the ballot box. When we have this many individuals disenfranchised in our state, our neighbors, our community members, we'll never see the reforms that will impact the lives of those who are serving time inside. We'll never see the reform of those who come from marginalized communities or who worship differently than the majority of Tennesseans or who look differently than the majority of Tennesseans. So to experience the kinds of reforms that we need to see in our state legislature, it's going to require that we open up and expand access to the ballot box by the droves. And these are not people who have lost their voting rights and it is somehow acceptable or we can brush it under the rug. These are individuals who've lost their voting rights because they can't pay their court fines, they can't pay their court fees, and our system in the state of Tennessee deems it necessary or acceptable that if you're back on child support, you can also lose your voting rights or have your voting rights restricted if you are recently coming out of prison. So we know that anything that we've spoken to and anything that we want to see, we have to have a more inclusive democracy. And if you can go to the next slide. And so if at this moment, I want to pass it back to Jack. I know I took a little extra time, but he's going to speak to a few of the laws that have already come across our desk that we're getting ready to advocate against.
Yes, here are just a few of the, put it lightly, frustrating bills that legislators have already filed. HB 3 is an attempt to disallow trans students from participating in single-sex sports. So to stop trans women, for example, from playing women's soccer or women's volleyball, it's transphobic, it's blatantly discriminatory, and we've seen efforts like it in other states around the country, like Oklahoma. Montana actually had a bill up like this that was defeated today, which is great news. So we'll be speaking out against this awful legislation in Tennessee. SB 16 would massively expand the ability of law enforcement to use drones for surveillance. So currently drones are permitted as an investigative or surveillance tool, but only in certain circumstances. Like for example, to search for missing persons. This would allow for surveillance at nearly any quote unquote outdoor event and allow law enforcement to retain drone data and footage from much longer periods. Could lead to major privacy violations and allow for expansion of police power. HB 21 would allow Tennessee state and local government to prevent refugees from resettling in Tennessee or in their local jurisdiction. It's a xenophobic bill. Tennessee should be seeking to help people who are escaping war or persecution or disasters. And if every bill passed a state like this one, then refugees wouldn't have a place in America. So we'll be opposing any bills which treat refugees and immigrants unfairly. And SB 193 would let government employees opt out of any training or seminar for really any reason. So for example, if a police department requires officers to attend a racial bias training, this bill would permit an officer to just not attend. And now this isn't to say that implicit bias training solves everything, but that a bill allowing officers or other government employees to opt out is regressive and it's wrong. So, we're early yet, but these are a few of the bills that we know we'll be standing in opposition to. And as more roll in, we'll be logging them on our website along with our position. So I will kick it back to Hetty to close this out and open it up for questions.
Thanks, Jack, and thanks, Brandon. There's some great questions in the Q&A, and so I want to give a chance to Brandon and Jack to answer some of them. One is really important for those who are just now ready and willing to start this effort of working with us and with legislators. And the question is, what are the top 3 tips you would tell someone who's never before had contact or interacted with legislators on beginning, I like the word, a healthy relationship of communication with their legislator? Brandon, you want to try that one?
Yeah, I think I'll take that one. I think let's start at the foundation. They are an elected representative. And so whether you voted for that person or not, they're responsible to their constituents. So if we start there, I think that could set the foundation for a healthy and responsible relationship. The second thing is, I really question, and for a long time I've questioned, just how much legislators really know. Now, there are legislators who are absolutely brilliant in their issue areas. We have medical doctors who are legislators who are very well versed in matters of healthcare and matters of treatment to the trans community or women's reproductive care. But by and large, if you have an expertise or even a personal stake in an issue, you have a valid point of view. So if they're passing laws that you disagree with, or they're considering laws that you disagree with that affect our educational institutions, our public schools, and you have children in those public schools, your viewpoint is just as valid as the legislator who is voting on those laws. And then lastly, I think what I'll say is that Hetty and I and Jack, we disagree a lot with legislators, but disagreeing doesn't mean we have to be disagreeable. And legislators who work with us know where we stand, and the legislators that we work with, we know where they stand. And so we're coming into contact in many cases for places that we can bridge the divide. And that is often how we treat individuals who are incarcerated, how we treat our students who are susceptible to the school to prison pipeline, how we are dealing with our free speech or our freedom of speech and religious liberty. So there is space for agreement, but just understanding and maybe even reconciling that we don't see eye to eye on everything, but why I'm coming to my legislator's office, who I am represented by, is because I want to speak to an issue that I have a personal stake in and that I believe my legislator could be amenable to understanding and hearing my point of view.
Thank you. And Jack, there's a question from Jacqueline about if people were going to get engaged in texting, if they were to volunteer, how does that happen? Do people use their own phone? What kind of anonymity is there when you join that?
So in our texting campaigns, what we've done in the past is used a service online called ThroughText. It's really easy to get acquainted with the service, and it will obscure your phone number. Often we use first names. So, hey, I'm Jacqueline from ACLU Tennessee, or volunteering with the ACLU of Tennessee. How can I, in the past, it's been, how can I help you vote? And, in the future, it's how can I help you learn more about HB3 or HB16? Again, if you sign up for alerts on our website or to volunteer, we'll make sure to get information to you about those volunteer sessions coming up.
Thanks. And Brandon, a question is asked, given what's going on today with the pandemic and doors being, closed, how do you expect lobbying and relationship building to be impacted by the pandemic this session?
It's much more difficult, but it's not just for us as advocates or residents of the state of Tennessee. It's even much more difficult for the legislators. I think we all need to recognize that we're in a new era, that we will be relying on conversations by phone, on virtual meetings. I hope many of you signed up or took the poll option for joining us by virtual lobby day, but we're just going to have to adjust. And so I'll say one quick thing, that in previous years and years going forward, the state capitol is you all's building. And so the level of intimidation needs to be reduced. I want people, when all this is clear and safe, to get acquainted with the state capitol, with Cordell Hall. But for this year, yes, things have changed. And so we're going to adjust as best as we can by lobbying and conversing safely, and knowing that we can't be inside the building this session.
That's true. There's a question by Jan and I'm going to take this question, which is, are we contacted by legislators for help or for our opinions? And the answer is a resounding yes, and by members of both sides of the aisle. Not in a place to actually share every detail, but I will say that they have Brandon's phone number, they have my phone number. We get texted at quite odd hours with requests, with need to have a conversation. People sit in committee and we text them, they text us. There are folks who want us to answer some questions, but don't want us to share that we're talking, that they're interested in where ACLU sits in a certain space. But I think the important thing, and Brandon spoke to it, is treating people that there's some trust that whatever we share, it's based in data, it's based in research, it's based in the Constitution. And again, while we don't agree on a number of issues, we can often find some common ground, though as someone did point out in the Q&A, I think, which is that there are some folks you're not going to be able to find that common ground or even be able to have a conversation that you can feel good about. But that comes, from experience, what offices to enter and what not to. But these are people elected by you. I think, when people say, what can I do? I like to say, move to a rural county, because we need to see some changes in the 80, 86, 88 counties that are represented by folks who don't necessarily always support the Constitution. But let me now go to, I think a question Brandon you could answer. People are asking the time for filing bills, like what is a window if people are still wanting to get to their legislator and ask them to file a bill on their behalf or to raise an issue with a legislator about an initiative they'd like them to pursue?
Absolutely. Let me just make a quick note about a previous answer about being disagreeing without being disagreeable. And I saw a comment about disagreement, but then there's unconstitutional. The ACLU, and let me just say resoundingly, is not afraid to sue this state or this governor. And if there's any confusion about us being okay with laws that are unconstitutional, I would hope we can look to our previous docket and our legal team's dynamic work in holding the state to account time after time after time. So let's just get that clear really quick. And then I think the additional point is to Hetty's question is there is still time. And if there are issues going on in your community, or if there are issues that are pressing to your to the communities that you belong to, whether it be a religious group or community of color, get in contact with your legislators, as we are getting in contact with legislators from both sides of the aisle, because we have up until the second week of February to have bills filed and introduced. That means we can present ideas. That means that legislation can be drafted and that legislation can be introduced. And we have our work cut out for us because we need sponsors in 2 chambers. But we still have so in the Senate, I just found out today that February 11th is the cutoff date for bill filing. And so if there are ideas that you all are thinking of, communicate with us, and we will do our best to ensure to gauge our capacity and to see if that we can get legislation drawn up so we can begin advocating and lobbying for.
Thank you, Brandon. Someone asks about the abortion ban bill that, you know, sort of speaks to exactly what you were talking about, because as we said, we will see you in court. And the bill passed both chambers during the special session, frankly, on the pandemic early in June, and no one expected it. Legislators who opposed the bill, nor lobbyists, groups like Planned Parenthood, ACLU, and others. And so you should know that 12 hours after that bill passed both chambers, we filed a lawsuit with our partners, and we are still in court. That's what the person asked. One of the questions, you know, where is that lawsuit? It's still in court. The law is not being enforced, because when we went to court, we got a temporary restraining order, a preliminary injunction, so that it's in, it was passed by the legislature. They were told it was unconstitutional, but they passed it anyway. So the argument, and you know, our Bible is the Constitution. We hold it proudly and wave it around, and we try to explain that, we try to translate, as I said earlier, the promises, the guarantees of the Bill of Rights, of the Constitution, into reality. It looks like we have a few more minutes. We promised we would end within an hour, but there are some other, I think, really important questions here. Someone asks, Brandon, I'd like you to answer this. How do we build true coalitions? How do we get people sitting at a table together and strategizing, sometimes when they don't agree with the strategies being proposed?
Yeah, excellent question. And Hetty, you might need to jump in too. I just want to state a point that before I joined the ACLU of Tennessee, I was with the National ACLU office. But when I came in, I immediately recognized that coalition work is something that the ACLU of Tennessee was extremely proficient at and extremely well versed in. And that's because of the respect of the organization, but also our willingness to collaborate with unlikely partners and allies. So I'll speak to what I think I know about healthy coalitions and working with others. It really depends on what issues we are advocating for. There is no need for us as an organization to be in coalition with with a organization that's, let's focus on fiscal responsibility, and we are trying to advocate for free speech. But there is purpose in us joining forces with a fiscal responsible organization in how we think about reforming our prison systems, because we spend an exorbitant amount of Tennessee taxpayer money in locking up Tennessee community members for offenses that can be treated with rehabilitation, can be treated with some kind of outside training or education so excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm stammering a bit. But I think it really comes down to what issues we're trying to build alliances for and who we're trying to build those alliances with. And so as it comes with voting, reforming our criminal justice system, looking at our school to prison pipeline, advocating for LGBT, there are individuals and groups who specialize, but who also have a connection to these issues. And I think it's incumbent on us getting familiar with who else is out there. I think it's incumbent on us to know what other organizations are prioritizing year to year, and to ask the simple question of, would you like to partner with us and work with us on this one bill or these 5 laws? And what we've seen in my time here is the willingness to bolster multiple organizations' credibility by joining forces. And we know when to draw the line, but we also know that there's a lot of work we can get done together if we extend the olive branch, get on the phone, and meet up with a very specific agenda.
Thanks, Brandon. And I'll just expand a little bit. You know, our commitment, our work right now is centered on making sure that racial equity is front and center as we pursue our work. And with that, it means also listening and being engaged with the grassroots groups, some who have lived experiences that not all of us have. And so one of the things I think with coalition work is also being able to come together and talk before you even engage in a partnership about what the work looks like and how we would work with each other, and finding space to say, our goal is to pursue an initiative and win it, but let's also talk about the various strategies we use. Let's talk about who's taking lead and who sits back. We often don't want to be a coalition partner if it's going to create problems for the issue where we sit back, we provide information. We often want to ensure that ACLU's name is not the one plastered on headlines, because that happens quite often when we want to recognize that there are partners, equal partners in the work, or partners that should be lifted up more. So coalition work is not easy. It requires a lot of patience, a lot of tenacity, a lot of transparency. But as I think I said earlier, it's a lot more rewarding. It's a lot more fun. And in the end of the day, the power of the growing chorus of voices is what's going to make a difference in advancing freedom, advancing fairness, justice, and equity in this state. And so I'm going to end on that note, except to say Brandon and Jack are amazing in terms of how they are really looking at the legislature this year and their commitment to making sure that Tennessee supporters, voters, students, even if you can't vote, are engaged in the process. So I urge you, there'll be a screen up in a minute. I urge you to contact them. Most importantly, contact the ACLU, our website. If there is a screen going up, a slide going up, our website is up there, www.aclu-tn.org. Sign up, think about what you can do, how we can work together. Information is on our website. Look at our national ACLU website as well. We're a big, happy family working across this country. It's really important that our voices, your voices, be heard. I can't thank Jack and Brandon enough for being the policy team. Awesome they are. For our legal team, our comms team, our people who do our fundraising, our infrastructure. This is we are a force to be reckoned with, and we love working with our partners and with our supporters and with Tennesseans to make sure that the landscape in this state changes as it has at the national level in DC. There's a lot of work to be done. There's a lot of healing that needs to happen. And there are a lot of bold, ambitious program initiatives that we need to pursue with you. So thank you.